Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 2, The Life of Buddha from the Adepts in the Eastern Esoteric Tradition by Manly Palmer Hall. Part 2, The Arhats of Buddhism. The Adepts. The Arhats of Buddhism, the Life of Buddha. In the esoteric doctrine, a Buddha appears during each of the 7 races which form the human life cycle. Gautama Buddha was the 4th of these wonderful teachers, and Maitreya Buddha will be the 5th. Krakucchanda, Kanakamuni and Kasyapa were the 3 Manushi, human Buddhas, who preceded Gautama. In the Tibetan system, there are 3 hierarchies of wonderful beings who emerge from Vajrasattva, the diamond heart of the world. The highest are the Dhyani Buddhas, esoterically 7 and exoterically 5 in number. These are reflected downward to become manifested through the 7 celestial bodhisattvas, of whom 2 are also concealed. Rays, or extensions of the celestial bodhisattvas, become embodied as the Manushi Buddhas, the teachers of humanity. By this arrangement, Gautama Buddha descended from the Dhyani Buddha Amitabha through the celestial bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Thus, it will be understood that behind the earthly ministry of the great teacher was an elaborate metaphysical concept of the universe. Numerous versions of the stories of Buddha's life are to be found in the Indian, Chinese, Burmese, and Japanese religious writings. These accounts agree substantially, but differ in a variety of details. Obviously, the biographical facts are obscure, and as is usual with the lives of religious teachers, countless legends have accumulated. These have transformed the life of the great Hindu sage into a veiled exposition of the essential elements of his doctrine. The man has been absorbed into the stream of his own philosophy so that he survives in human memory as the very embodiment of the Noble Eightfold Path. The earliest records lack most of the familiar embellishments and reveal the simple humanity of the great reformer. It may happen, however, that truths are entrusted to the keeping of kindly and gracious myths, and not to a sterile and profane history. One of the narrations will be typical of them all and can be supplemented from other records. Prince Siddhartha, or Gautama, 563 to 483 BC, was the son of Suddhodana, king of Kapilavastu in Kolasa. The discovery in 1895 of a column erected by the Emperor Asoka established the true location of Buddha's birthplace, hitherto unknown. Kapilavastu, of which some ruins remain, was in South Nepal, a few miles north of the boundary of India. Suddhodana married 2 sisters, Gautami and Maya, Mahamaya, daughters of another king of the Shakya race named Supra Buddha. Maya was the younger, but she was so beautiful and virtuous that the king favored her, to the distress and jealousy of her elder sister. King Suddhodana was a just and benevolent ruler, but his heart was troubled, for he could not accomplish the happiness of his people because their religious and ethical doctrines were corrupt. Aware of the evils that afflicted the times, the compassionate one, Prabhupala, who resided in the Tushita heaven, resolved to manifest in the physical world for the salvation of creatures. This exalted bodhisattva had already performed many sacrifices in the service of mankind, and he therefore looked down into the illusional sphere to find a suitable place for his earthly ministry. Aware of the natural justice in Suddhodana's heart and the moral excellence of Maya, the Blessed One descended from the abode of the illumined, accompanied by a procession of devas, heavenly musicians, and guardian spirits, and approached in the dark hours of the night the palace pavilion where the good king and his wife were sleeping. Suddenly Maya became aware that the atmosphere about her was filled with celestial music, and rising on her couch, she beheld a golden pagoda floating in the midst of a purple cloud, which was pierced with many rays of light. The door of the pagoda opened, and within its shrine was a golden Buddha seated in meditation. Then a white elephant with a red head and 6 tusks appeared, bearing on its head a white lotus, and upon this flower the golden Buddha took his seat. From the white spot in the forehead of the gleaming figure a brilliant light shone which illumined the whole universe. The radiant presence then addressed the queen. "I have something to announce to thee, linked to thee already by a chain of causes which had their origin in the past. I have resolved to enter thy womb and so gain a passage into the world in order to bring salvation to mankind sunk in greedy desire and ignorance." Maya was terrified, but the Great One calmed her fears, and stepping down from his throne on the white elephant, he passed into her body like a shadow. In that moment, King Suddhodana also awoke and announced that he had received the same vision. Maya and her husband then concluded that heaven had answered their prayers and had bestowed upon them a wonderful son. The legend continues and explains that even before his birth, the coming Buddha, as an infant, appeared to Maya in visions, instructing her in the doctrine and assuring her of a blessed destiny. When the period for the birth of the child came, Suddhodana caused a great festival to be held for all his people in the ancestral gardens of the Lumbini Grove. Within this beautiful park were lakes and waterfalls, many rare and exotic plants and flowers, and birds with gay-colored plumage. There also stood the sorrowless tree, Sultry, bearing gorgeous blossoms. After the feast, the king asked Maya to pick for him a flower from the sorrowless tree. As she raised her arm toward one of the branches, her robe opened and the infant was born into the world from her right side, and she felt no pain. From the earth at Maya's feet sprang a blue lotus flower as large as a chariot wheel, and upon this the newborn infant rested, his body surrounded with a radiance. The heavens opened, and the 4 kings of the Devas, the 2 kings of the Nagas, and legions of spirits and bodhisattvas formed a celestial court around the newborn child. The baby then descended from the lotus flower and took 3 steps forward and 4 steps backward. Pointing with its right hand to heaven and with its left hand to the earth, the infant pronounced these words with the voice of a lion: "I alone of all beings in heaven above and under the heavens am worthy of honor." The baby was immediately given into the keeping of his aunt, who had repented of all her evil ways. 7 days later, Queen Maya died. Her body was cremated and the ashes placed in an urn. The palace where she had lived was removed to the Mount of the Evening Sun, and the vase containing her remains was deposited there. Nearby, a pagoda, 160 feet in height, was erected to her memory. The sorrowless tree was taken from the Lumbini Grove and replanted in front of her mausoleum. From Ferguson's The Cave Temples of India, the Rishi Asita with the infant Buddha in his arms. From an ancient painting in the caves at Ajanta. The boy was named Prince Siddhartha, and he grew so rapidly that when he was 3 years old, his conduct and intelligence were equal to those of an adult. At the age of 8, he was placed under the tuition of Mitra, the Brahman. The prince already revealed an inclination for religious meditation and a boundless love for humanity, and having learned all that his venerable teacher was able to impart, he returned to the palace of his father. It was there that he was visited by the Rishi Asita, who recognized on Siddhartha the 32 signs of a perfect Buddha and foretold that he would become a savior of mankind. Suddhodana, desirous that his son should succeed to the kingdom, attempted to turn the mind of the young prince from his mystical reveries, but destiny had decreed otherwise. At the age of 15, Prince Siddhartha was proclaimed heir to the throne, but he still chose to live in a world of books and holy thoughts. Lest the prince forsake the world without leaving an heir, a wife was selected for him. Some accounts indicate that he chose her himself. 3 palaces were built by the king for Prince Siddhartha and Yasodhara, his bride. It was while he was thus living in temporal splendor that the 4 visions or mystical experiences came to him. On the first occasion, the blessed beings in the Tushita heaven caused the prince to see an aged and infirm man. Destiny, stirring in Siddhartha's heart, reminded him of the shortness of the mortal span and the inevitable decrepitude of years. On the second occasion, the sky sages fashioned for the prince the appearance of a man wasted by the ravages of an incurable disease and horrible to look upon. Chandaka, who drove Siddhartha's chariot, explained that the sufferer had come to this terrible condition because he had lacked self-control and had become a servant of appetite, excess, and vice. A deep melancholy came upon the prince, and he returned sadly to his palace. On the third occasion, the Deva Sudavasa assumed the likeness of a corpse, and Siddhartha saw death for the first time in his life. As he gazed upon the emaciated body, the prince was inwardly reminded that all earthly beings share in a common mortality. "What then is life?" asked the prince, "if it must end in this?" On the fourth occasion, a stately monk appeared, wearing a simple saffron robe. The face of this holy man was radiant with peace, and there was enlightenment in his eyes. Of course, the monk was a great being in disguise, and when he had stirred the sleeping wisdom in Siddhartha's heart, the Arhat rose into the air, surrounded by flames, and disappeared. Strengthened by the implications of the four visions, Prince Siddhartha determined to assume the monastic life. The incarnated Bodhisattva was beginning to remember the destiny which had brought him to rebirth. King Suddhodana observed that his son was developing a melancholy mood. Fearful that the young man intended to become an ascetic, the king ordered guards to be placed at all the gates of the palace. But on the night that was destined, the Arhats in the Toshita heaven caused a sleep to descend upon the guards and upon all the court. In the magic silence, the young prince rose from his bed and, standing for a moment by the couch of his wife, took a beautiful robe and laid it over her body. Chandaka, always faithful, met him at the palace door. Swiftly they rode away into the night, and there was no sound as they passed, for the Lokapala silenced the horses' hooves. When they had traveled to a safe distance, Prince Siddhartha removed his jewels and gave them to Chandaka. Then with a knife he cut off his princely lock of hair and tossed it to the winds, and each of the hairs was taken away by little spirits. Then he removed his fine raiment and put on a rough hunter's garb. After an affectionate farewell to his faithful friend and his noble horse, the prince walked slowly down the dusty road without food or money, carrying in his hand only a beggar's bowl. As was the custom of that time, Siddhartha journeyed to the caves of celebrated hermits and the remote ashramas of renowned sages. Always he asked three questions. "Tell me, Venerable Sir, where did we come from? Why are we here? Where do we go?" The prince learned many secrets of nature, but the great questions remained unanswered. After Siddhartha had formally renounced all worldly ambitions, he visited the court of the friendly king of Rajagriha. He came not as a royal guest, but as a mendicant seeking truth. From the court of this monarch, he proceeded to Uruvela, a village near Gaya. Here, together with 5 ascetics who had been attracted by his sincerity, he entered upon the great struggle. For 6 years he practiced such austerity and self-discipline that he finally collapsed, and it was feared that he would not survive. His body was so reduced and weakened that even those who knew him well were unable to recognize the former prince. Finally convinced that such practices would not accomplish the enlightenment which he sought, Siddhartha renounced them forever. After this decision, he was deserted by his 5 companions because they regarded him as having failed in his religious obligations. Alone he departed to continue his wanderings. Discouraged, weary, and broken by 6 years of constant pilgrimage and disappointment, Siddhartha finally sank to rest on a little knoll under the spreading branches of what is now called the sacred banyan tree at Bodh Gaya. Here he resolved to remain, saying, "Never from this seat will I stir until I have attained the supreme and absolute wisdom." The old records say that Siddhartha sat on a couch or platform of grass on the eastern side of the tree, facing to the east. As the hours passed, he sank into a deep and wonderful peace. Gradually, the consciousness within him disentangled itself from the shadow of the mortal frame. He rose through the spheres of space, and before his inner vision unfolded the drama of human existence. He knew within himself both the causes of things and the remedies. All forms of temptation descended upon him, striving to capture his thoughts in the web of illusion, but he remained unmoved. At last, the moment of enlightenment came, and the Bodhisattva from the Tushita heaven attained earthly Buddhahood. The universe was filled with rejoicing, and processions of ancient sages and the Buddhas of earlier times came down from the sky. And in the midst of them, the light of Asia sat transfigured. There is a legend that Siddhartha performed 3 vigils as he waited under the Bodh tree. In the first vigil, he gained the knowledge of all his previous existences. In the second, he came to know all present states of beings. In the third, he apperceived all changes, causes, and effects, and on the following dawn, he became all-knowing. From that time on, Prince Siddhartha was only a name of a young man who had been absorbed into the universal ocean of infinite compassion. In his place was now the Buddha. The seeker had found that which he sought and had become the teacher of men. After the illumination, the Buddha was doubtful as to the proper time and circumstance for the proclamation of his doctrine. He then experienced the inward decision that the 5 ascetics who had been his previous companions should be the first to receive the teaching. He found them in the deer park, at what is now the town of Sarnath, near Benares, and seating himself on a low mound, he delivered to them his first sermon. At the beginning, the ascetics, fearing that they would be contaminated by association with a relapsed mendicant, remained at some distance. When the sermon, setting in motion the wheel of the law, was finished, however, they were at his feet, asking to be ordained. These were the first members of the Sangha, order. Buddha, mindful of the manner in which he had so hastily departed from his father and wife, resolved to visit them and bring the glad tidings of his doctrine to the people of Kapilavastu. In the 6th year after the illumination, accompanied by hundreds of disciples, he approached the city of his birth, and King Suddhodana, greatly rejoicing, prepared for his reception. Buddha sent a messenger to his father to remind the king that his son was no longer a prince, and that he would come only as a holy man serving truth. He would enter Kapilavastu with 1,500 disciples and be one among them, in no way to be distinguished. Yasodhara obtained permission to be among the women of the palace who went forth to pay honor to the monks. She led by the hand Buddha's son, Rahula, a boy of 6 years. Realizing that she would be unable to distinguish her husband among the assembly of shaven-headed, saffron-robed monks, she gave the boy the robe which Prince Siddhartha had laid over her couch the night he left, and told Rahula to take it to his father. With unerring instinct, the boy passed through the vast gathering and fell on his knees before the monk who occupied the 3rd seat in the central group. Buddha took the garment in his hand and pronounced with a clear voice, "Unchangeable truth of the universal law, mysterious insight and state of unconditionedness, the wisdom and the prayer of all beings are both fulfilled." His countenance was transfigured, and the tuft of white hair on his forehead became radiant with the inner illumination. From Hasokigen Shakajitsuroku, Rahula presenting the coverlet from his mother's couch to his father, the Buddha. In the version presented by the Shakajitsuroku, Yasodhara, in fulfillment of a prophecy, had carried the son of the Tathagata in her body for 6 years before the boy was born. For this she had been condemned, for when she gave birth to her child after so long a time, it was rumored that she had been untrue to her husband. As Buddha held the robe from her couch in his hand, he pronounced a wonderful spell, and spreading the cloth, he showed the assembly that embroidered upon it were the words, "6 years after my departure, thou shalt have a lovely boy, who shall be a sage from his birth." Then the king and all his court realized that they had unjustly suspected Princess Yasodhara. In other versions, this entire episode is omitted, and the infant Rahula was asleep with his mother on the night when Prince Siddhartha departed in his search for wisdom. When Buddha was about to enter parinirvana, he entrusted the supreme law to the 16 great Arhats and their followers. Rahula is listed among these Arhats, and there are numerous legends about him. On his journey to Kapilavastu, Buddha also visited the shrine of his mother and consecrated the site as a monastery. It is recorded that Queen Maya, because of her numerous virtues in a previous state of existence, and because she had been selected as the mother of the great incarnation, had merited a happy abode in the paradise of Indra. With 2 disciples, Buddha ascended upon a golden cloud into the presence of his mother and gave her the advanced instructions. The details are contained in the Sutra of Buddha's ascension to the Trayastrimsa heaven to preach the law for his mother's sake. As a token of her eternal affection, Maya then gave her son the mandara flower which she wore in her hair. This is the traditional explanation for the practice of offering flowers before the shrine of Buddha and other bodhisattvas. Buddha reached the Trayastrimsa heaven to instruct his mother by 3 supernatural steps or conditions of disciplined consciousness. He remained for 3 months in the abode of Indra in order that he might recite all the essentials of the law. When the time came for the Great One to return to earth, Indra created for his descent 3 steep flights of steps, or ladders. The center flight of precious jewels, the one on the right side of silver, and the one on the left side of gold. Buddha came down by the middle flight with Mahabrahma, the lord of the Brahma heavens, and Indra, lord of the 33 divinities, beside him on the silver and gold stairs. These attendant beings held over the head of Buddha a canopy composed of the 7 most precious substances. Behind this exalted group followed a multitude of bodhisattvas, devas, and celestial beings. When Buddha placed his foot upon the earth, the 3 ladders disappeared into the ground, except for the central one, of which 7 steps remained visible. Asoka marked the site, the ancient city of Sankisa, with a stone column, and Huanxiang reported that the 7 rungs of the ladder stood in their original position for many centuries, but had also vanished into the earth before he reached Sankasya. There are many different descriptions of the ladders and the substances of which they were composed, but always they were of rare and wonderful materials. To the uninitiated, these heavenly stairs resembled 3 rainbows, visible at one time. Representations of this incident in the story of Buddha exist in bronze and upon the Tibetan tankas, or religious paintings, but are extremely rare. Although the doctrine of rebirth is far older than Buddhism, it has come to be directly associated with this system. During his numerous discourses, Buddha frequently referred to events which had occurred in his previous incarnations. These accounts were carefully collected by the disciples of the Master and are included in the canon of the scriptures. The full title of this collection is The Commentary of the Jatakas. It contains references to 550 of the previous embodiments of the Buddha. Representations of these incarnations have been found carved on the railings and around the domes of the shrines of Amaravati, Sanchi, and Barhut. They are magnificently depicted on the galleries at the Borobudur in Java. In each of his previous forms, whether animal or human, the Master is represented as performing some unselfish service for the improvement of mankind. The Jataka stories are important in terms of doctrine because Buddha used them to explain the operations of the law of karma in his final incarnation as the great teacher. The Tathagata lived for more than 45 years after the illumination, and during that long period he had no fixed residence. He journeyed about, teaching and receiving converts into the Sangha. He ministered especially in the kingdom of Magadha, though traditions have enlarged the regions where he taught. During this time he revealed many of the sutras, which were committed to memory by his disciples. There are detailed accounts of the wonderful occurrences associated with his preaching, but most of these are apocryphal. Buddha was over 80 years of age when he realized that the time had come for him to attain the parinirvana. Accompanied by Ananda and an assembly of monks, Buddha came to the Saltri Grove at Kusinagara. Here he caused a couch to be spread, and on this he rested on his right side with his head to the north. This is called the posture of the lion. It is said that the trees bloomed out of season and scattered flowers over him. A wandering ascetic named Subhadra listened to the teachings of the Buddha and was the last disciple Buddha accepted while he was still alive. The story that Buddha died as the result of eating tainted boar's flesh is probably unhistorical. It may relate to the conflict between Brahmanism and early Buddhism. The Book of the Great Decease describes the death of the great teacher who entered meditation and caused his consciousness to ascend gradually to the supreme state. Buddha entered the parinirvana on the 15th day of the 2nd month. On the 22nd day, his body was bathed with fragrant water and wrapped with embroidered cloth and white satin. The remains were then replaced in the coffin, which was closed. At this time, the mother of Buddha descended from the Tanti paradise to weep over her son. In respect for her, the coffin was opened. Immediately, Buddha rose, placed his hands together and said, "You have come down from a distant paradise." He then turned to Ananda with the words, "You should know that it is for an example in after times to those who are not filial, that I have now left my coffin to ask respecting the health and peace of my mother." This would conflict with the popular concept that the parinirvana constitutes the total extinction of consciousness. After this incident, the ritual of cremation took place. The body of the Tathagata was placed upon a funeral pyre and was finally consumed by a flame that sprang from the heart of the corpse. The relics which remained were carefully gathered by the members of the order and deposited in appropriate reliquaries. There is a later account that the Emperor Asoka divided these remains into 84,000 parts and raised a stupa or monument over each of these parts. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.